Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're digging into something really, fundamental. Who actually holds the economic power in our world?
And crucially, how does gender fit into that picture?
Exactly. Think of this as your quick inside look at the dynamics right at the top. We're drawing on some really fascinating new research.
Right. We're focusing on a study called Varieties of Economic Elites, a gender-focused reading of the evidence. And what's great is it uses the World Elite Database, the WED.
WED, yeah.
Okay. It's basically this standardized set of data covering top economic players across 16 different countries.
16, wow. So it allows for some real comparisons then.
It really does. Comparisons about things like age, gender, across different national contexts.
Okay, so our mission for you listening is to unpack the key findings from this study. We've got 3 core questions lined up.
Yep. What are they?
First, at what age do men and women typically hit that peak of economic power? Is there a difference? Second, how does the number of women in these top economic roles stack up against other powerful positions, like parliaments, government ministers, even corporate boards?
Interesting comparison.
And finally, does the general level of gender equality in a country actually seem to connect with how inclusive its economic elite is?
Got it. So age, comparison across spheres, and the broader national climate.
That's the plan. Ready to jump in?
Data on the screen, numbers come alive. Male, female flows where the patterns thrive. Visual charts, public colors unify. Gender decoded, bringing truth to light. Small drum fill. We break it down, real talk. Trends unveiling, facts from every block. Here's your insight, watch the data glide. Gender decoded, let the beats collide.
Okay, let's dive in. Starting with age, what do they find?
Well, the first big thing is what they call the gerontocratic norm,
Gerontocratic.
meaning older.
Yeah, basically. Across all these countries, the average age, the median for people in top economic spots is late 50s, early 60s. The U.S. is actually the oldest median age of 62.
Wow, 62.
And China and Poland are the youngest, down around 55, 55 and a half. So it suggests you generally need a lot of experience under your belt.
Okay, that makes sense. You climb the ladder. But what happens when you slice it by gender? Does it get more interesting?
Oh, absolutely. This is where it kind of flips expectations. The common idea might be that women have to be older to finally break through, right?
Yeah, you hear that a lot.
But actually, the study found that's only true in Denmark and the U.S.
Only 2 countries. Yep. In most of the others, they looked at places like Poland, Russia, Norway, Switzerland, the UK. The female elites are actually younger than the men.
Younger? By how much?
Well, Poland is the standout. There, women at the top are, on average, 9 years younger than the men.
9 years. That's a huge gap.
It really is. In the other countries I mentioned, it's more like 2 to 3 years younger, but still younger.
Okay, 9 years in Poland. What's going on there? How do they explain that? Different career paths or?
The study suggests a couple things. One idea is this pipeline or selection effect. Basically, where women elites are younger, it might mean they're being drawn from more recent generations, cohorts that came up when there was more focus on gender equality in education, early jobs.
Right, benefiting from newer opportunity.
Exactly, while the men might be coming through longer established, maybe more traditional pipelines that historically favored them.
That makes a lot of sense, that historical momentum idea. But still, 9 years in Poland. Is there anything specific there?
There is, and the stat is pretty mind-blowing, actually. In Poland, get this, 7% of their entire economic elite is under 40.
7% under 40. That's young for that level.
It is. And these younger elites, they are disproportionately women.
Wow.
It completely contradicts that slow, steady climb stereotype, especially for women. The study even floats the idea that EU-funded training programs for board-level skills might be playing a role, accelerating women's careers there.
Huh. Okay, really interesting age dynamics. Let's shift gears then. How does women's representation in these economic elites compare to other power centers?
Yeah.
Like politics, corporate boards?
Okay, for this, you need to picture figure 2 in the study. It's one of those radar charts, like a spider web.
Got it. Spokes coming out from the middle.
Exactly. Each spoke is a different arena. Economic elites from the WED, parliaments, government cabinets, and boards of listed companies. And the further the line goes out along a spoke, the more men there are for every woman. So a long spike means fewer women, less gender equality.
Okay. Longer spike, more male-dominated. So what's the big picture from this chart?
The key thing, really, is that the WED line, the one for economic elites, it generally hugs the center the most.
Hugs the center, meaning shorter spikes. Oh, wait. No, longer spikes mean less equality. So hugging the center means...
No, sorry, you were right the first time. Hugging the center means shorter spikes. But wait, let me reread that. Apologies, you're right, I misspoke. Longer spikes mean more men per woman, less equality. The WED line doesn't hug the center.
Ah, okay. So the economic elite line generally has the longer spikes.
Yes, precisely. My mistake. Across most countries, the WED line extends further out, meaning economic elites are generally the most male-dominated sphere they looked at.
Even more than corporate boards. That's surprising.
It is quite surprising, isn't it? You might think boards are the final frontier. This suggests the very top tier of economic power, as defined by WED, is even tougher to crack.
Right. And this leads to something they call the Nordic paradox.
Exactly. Countries like Norway, Sweden, famous for good gender balance in parliament and government cabinets.
Oh, yeah, world leaders often.
But their WED spikes, while better than many others, aren't as short as their political ones. Their economic elites aren't quite as balanced as their parliaments or cabinets.
So why the gap? Why are politics and maybe boards easier to influence in the Nordics than the absolute economic top?
Well, the researchers suggest things like quotas, like for board seats on listed companies. These direct policies can change those visible public sector and corporate metrics faster. But influencing the more private, maybe less formally regulated world where these top economic elites are formed, that seems to take longer. Maybe different strategies are needed.
Makes sense. Visibility, specific rules.
No.
What about the other surprise? Latin and Southern Europe.
Yeah, this was interesting. Chile and Portugal actually show smaller WED spikes relative to their parliamentary gender ratios. Meaning, in those places, women seem to find it relatively easier to get into the economic elite compared to getting elected to parliament. It's kind of the opposite of the Nordic situation.
Huh. Why might that be?
The study speculates a bit. Maybe in some emerging economies, family-run business empires, the big conglomerates, might sometimes act as gender gate openers.
Gate openers. How so?
Maybe bringing daughters or other female relatives into top roles, perhaps as a way to look more modern or just tap into talent. It's a hypothesis.
Interesting. So the path to power isn't the same everywhere.
Yeah.
What about the U.S. in this comparison?
Yeah, the U.S. is fascinating. It doesn't rank super high globally for women in Congress, right?
Like compared to many European countries.
But its WED gender ratio, the balance in the economic elite, is actually better than Italy's or Germany's.
Better than Germany. Okay. Why?
The study suggests it might be linked to the visibility of high-profile female CEOs and tech founders in the U.S. Even if political parity isn't there, these prominent business figures might shift the needle slightly at the very top economically.
So, role models and visibility matter. Okay, let's move to our third big question. The link between a country's overall gender climate and its economic elite.
Right. Figure 3 in the study shows this really clearly. It's a scatter plot. On one axis, you've got the country's score from the World Economic Forum's Gender Gap Index. Higher score means more overall gender equality across society.
Okay, like health, education, political participation.
Exactly. And on the other axis, you have the WED gender ratio. But here, a lower ratio means more women in the economic elite, so more equality at the top.
Right. Lower ratio is better for women's representation.
Right.
And what does the plot show?
A really clear upward trend. The points cluster along a line going up from bottom left to top right. It shows a strong positive correlation. Meaning countries that do better on overall gender equality, higher gender gap index score, also tend to have more women in their economic elite, a lower WED ratio. The study mentions a correlation coefficient around 0.8.
Wow, 0.8 is a very strong link in social science terms.
It really is. It strongly suggests that broader societal equality paves the way for women to reach the economic summit.
Makes intuitive sense, doesn't it? A level playing field helps everywhere. Any countries that really exemplify this?
Absolutely. They point to the Nordic cluster, Finland, Sweden, Norway. They score high on the gender gap index, and they have relatively low WED ratios. They fit the pattern well.
The models, in a way. What about outliers? Countries that don't fit the trend?
Yeah, a couple are interesting. Russia and China kind of underperform on this chart.
Meaning they have fewer women at the economic top than you'd expect based on their overall gender gap score.
Exactly. It suggests that even with some formal equality measures, there might be deeper informal barriers or cultural factors holding women back from the very highest economic positions there.
A reminder that rules on paper aren't always the whole story.
Yeah.
Any country's punching above their weight, doing better than expected.
Argentina stands out. It has more women in its economic elite than its gender gap index score alone would predict.
Why might that be?
The study suggests maybe historical legacies, perhaps the impact of a strong women's movement creating pathways over time. It's complex.
Fascinating how history echoes. You mentioned a specific stat about Norway earlier.
Yes. This one's really striking. Norway has a very high gender gap score, about 0.84 out of 1.
Very good, yeah.
And it also has the lowest male-to-female ratio in the WED data. It's about 4 men for every 1 woman.
So roughly 20% women at the very top economically.
Precisely. About 20%, which is like 4 times the international average found in the study.
Wow. And that's without specific quotas for this particular group of economic elites.
That's what the study highlights. This representation level seems to have been achieved alongside broader equality measures, not necessarily quotas targeting this exact elite definition.
Okay, 20% is significant. So pulling these threads together, age, what does it suggest about career paths for men versus women reaching the top?
Well, the study paints sort of contrasting pictures. For many women who get there, it seems characterized by late career entry relative to men. They might arrive at the peak later.
Except maybe Poland.
Exactly. Poland seems the exception, possibly with that fast acceleration, maybe helped by those EU training funds we talked about.
And for men?
For men, the pattern seems more like early entrants dominate. They get onto the track earlier, benefit from established networks, mentorship maybe, which contributes to that older median age overall.
Okay, different timings. What about where they reach the top? Different industries?
Yeah, there seems to be some sectoral tunneling, as the study calls it.
Sectoral tunneling.
Women are more often found in leadership in newer sectors, things like digital, consumer-focused industries, maybe places seen as more meritocratic, where networks are less entrenched.
Okay, newer industries, maybe fewer old boys clubs.
Perhaps. Whereas men are still more dominant in the legacy strongholds, think energy, finance, heavy manufacturing, industries with long histories, maybe more rigid structures.
So, established versus emerging pathways, potentially. Does the study mention any downsides to these patterns? Any risks?
Yes, a couple of things. They talk about the glass cliff watch.
The glass cliff. I've heard of that.
Yeah, the idea that when women do get promoted to top jobs, especially quickly, it might disproportionately be in really risky situations, turnaround jobs where failure is more likely.
So their rapid rise isn't always a purely positive sign.
It could be a factor, yeah. And related to the age thing, they also mentioned a potential silver ceiling.
Silver ceiling, not glass.
Silver, yeah. In countries with much older, mostly male elites, they mentioned the US and Germany, could this older leadership group staying in power longer actually hinder innovation or make succession planning difficult? Kind of bottleneck at the top.
Interesting points. So it's not just about representation, but the dynamics within that elite group. Now, what does the study say drives these patterns overall? What are the underlying forces?
They identify 5 key drivers. First is institutional gatekeeping.
Meaning the informal stuff.
Networks, biases.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. The unwritten rules and established practices that tend to favor certain groups. Second, policy levers.
Like quotas, transparency rules.
Yep. Things governments can actually do, like quotas for boards or requiring disclosure of diversity data. These clearly have an impact.
Okay, number 3.
Economic transition timing. This suggests that economies that opened up or liberalized later, maybe like Poland or China post-Cold War, might offer newer paths for women, bypassing some older patriarchal structures.
Right, chance to build new systems.
Fourth, sectoral mix. Basically, the rise of knowledge-based economies like tech in the US or UK creates different kinds of elite roles less tied to old industrial power.
New industries, new rules. And the last one.
Number 5 is cultural norms and care infrastructure. This is about societal attitudes, but also practical things like affordable childcare and decent parental leave policies. These make a huge difference in whether women's careers get derailed.
So it's a real mix. Formal rules, informal networks, big economic shifts, and deep cultural factors. Okay, before we finish, let's just quickly recap some of those really standout numbers, the head-spinning facts.
Yeah, good idea. Definitely remember that 9-year age reversal. In Poland, female elites significantly younger than male ones.
Got it.
Then Norway hitting that 20% female at the summit, roughly, without specific WED level quotas.
Impressive.
The gerontocracy alert U.S. economic elites being, on average, older than U.S. senators.
Puts it in perspective.
And that really strong correlation coefficient near 0.8, linking a country's overall gender equality score with how many women are in its economic elite.
That connection seems undeniable. Okay, so wrapping this all up, what's the big picture conclusion from this deep dive?
Well, the data clearly shows gender gaps at the top are still very real globally. But progress does seem faster where countries have already invested heavily in broader gender equality policies. And the age patterns suggest we might be seeing a shift, more women among the younger generation of leads, especially in places that changed a lot more recently.
And what's the takeaway message then? For policy, for business?
I think it reinforces that proactive steps matter. Quotas, transparency, yes, but also things like childcare support. These aren't just nice-to-haves. They seem crucial for dismantling barriers, and for companies, for investors, the message is pretty clear. Diversity isn't just about fairness. It looks like a strategic advantage.
How so?
Well, the link between diverse leadership and maybe newer perspectives, potentially younger strategic thinking, it seems connected to staying competitive. Look at Norway and Finland, high equality, strong economies.
Right, so diversity, smart business, essentially. Okay, as we finish up, here's maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. That glass ceiling at the economic peak, it's definitely still there in many places, but the cracks seem to be appearing fastest and widest, where societies invest in equality across the board. Watching how these age and gender dynamics evolve at the very top over the next 10 years or so, that's going to tell us a lot about whether the 21st century economy is becoming truly inclusive. We hope this deep dive gave you some real food for thought and maybe spark some new questions about what economic leadership looks like now and what it could look like in the future.